Hi, everyone. My name is Misael Olaguibel, and I'm part of Christians at UTEP. We would like to welcome you all to our 2020 Winter Pursuit. In this Winter Pursuit, we will be enjoying and reading the book of Philippians all together, and we are hoping that we can all enjoy this book, grow from it, that the Lord would find a way to grow more in our hearts through this speaking. Um, the book of Philippians, it's actually an epistle that Paul wrote to the church in Philippi. A little bit of a background here in the for the book of Philippians is, the author is Paul and Timothy, which we will come to find, in the first few verses of this epistle. Um, the time of the time or the year that this epistle was written is approximately 64 AD, and the place where it actually was written was in Rome. Okay, some of you may have already known that, and one particular uh, thing about where in Rome is actually Paul was imprisoned. So Paul actually wrote this in prison, in with the help of Timothy as well. Timothy was a young man that was laboring alongside of Paul in the ministry, in the preaching of the gospel, in the establishing of churches throughout all of Asia and in Rome, in Galatia, in Ephesus, Colossians. There was many epistles that Paul wrote, but in this particular epistle, he is writing to the Philippians, and it's a very simple but yet very enjoyable book because Philippians, it talks nothing else but experiencing Christ. So if you want to get a just a summary of what Philippians is about, well, it's just experiencing Christ. Now, Paul does focus on several points of ways of experiencing Christ in this book, which are taking Christ as our living, as our pattern, power, as our goal, and as our secret. And all of those ways we will actually cover throughout the 4 chapters of Philippians. In this particular chapter, we will enjoy, or we will learn, how to experience Christ, taking him as our living, right? Um, First of all, I'd like to start off with what we will find in the first few verses of Philippians. And I will start by reading the first 3 verses. It says, starting from verse number 3, it says, I thank my God upon my remembrance of you, always in my every petition on behalf of you all, making my petition with joy for your fellowship unto the furtherance of the gospel from the first day until now. So I want to emphasize this matter right here, fellowship. It says fellowship unto the furtherance of the gospel. We have to know the meaning of this, word fellowship. When it comes to the fellowship in the body of Christ, you can consider the importance of it, just like the the flow of the blood in the human body, right? If there is no flow in the human body, well, there's death. There's if you cut the flow of your arm, you fall asleep on it, it'll eventually go numb. Why? Because there's no life. There's that lack of life in there, so it starts going numb. Um, so the same thing, the fellowship, it's like a participation of the same flow. So one of the things that we have to note is that Paul had a very close relationship with the saints in Philippi, with the Philippians, because you have to understand that Paul had been traveling quite a bit. In his ministry, Paul traveled through many different provinces, different cities, preaching the gospel, which is Christ, right? Death and resurrection of Christ, and the church, right? Paul talks about that in Ephesians, but that's a different matter. So Paul was preaching Christ, and the life, the church life, the life of the church, of meeting and all that good stuff. But not all the churches that Paul had established kept a very close connection with him. But the saints in Philippi, they actually did keep a very personal communication with the apostle, and they helped them as much as they could, whether it was monetary. They would support him in his travels. They kept in touch with him. They prayed for him. So there was many things that the church in Philippi that they did to participate in this fellowship, in this, for the furtherance of the gospel. So they had quite a bit of participation in the work that the Lord was doing in Paul, right? So being part of this fellowship, it's as important as a person who's actually out there doing the work. So don't think that, well, I don't preach the gospel much myself, but if you pray for those that are doing the work, or you help them out somehow, giving them a meal, just examples, that's the way that are praying for them. That's the way that we are part of this fellowship for the furtherance of the gospel, right? Here in the first part, it also talks about a few different things about the gospel, right? It talks about the fellowship of the gospel, right? It talks about the defense and confirmation, right, of the gospel. It also talks about the advancement of the gospel, and it talks about the faith of the gospel. We have to know a little bit of background on what was going on here. Paul had already established several churches, but what happened was there a mixture started to come in and blend in with the preaching of Paul. And you might ask yourself, well, what do you mean mixture? Well, for example, there was Judaism. Religion was starting to come in and mingle itself with what Paul would preach. And I'll just give you an example. They would say, okay, well, yeah, Christ is fine. Yeah, it's okay to preach Christ, but you know what? What about this tradition? What about that? What about circumcision? So they were bringing in a lot of old practices that were done away with. They were fulfilled by Christ, but nonetheless, there was Judaism that Paul had to deal with the Galatians. There was also Gnosticism in Colossians, the belief of many gods. Yeah, there's God, there's Christ, but you know what? There's also these gods. You got to also take them into account. So there was all this mixture. There was all this uh, resisting. Paul had to defend all this perverting and distorting of all these heresies, right? So Paul mentions what's called the defense of the and confirmation of the gospel. And so on the fight, on the negative side, there was a fight to defend what the truth was against all these different mixtures, all these lies that were being brought in and mixed in with the gospel. And on the positive side, there was the confirmation. Paul had to confirm, he had to announce, all the revelation of God's mysteries concerning Christ and the church. As Paul revealed in his epistles, he was pretty much reiterating what he had already said when he went on his ministry trips throughout Asia and whatnot, and Italy. So we have this fight that's going on, and Paul was in front of that fight, and for that exact reason is why Paul was imprisoned, because he was rejecting, and he was exposing all that false uh, gospels. That is the reason why Paul was in prison. But that didn't stop Paul. It actually worked for the better, because that's how Paul came to write all his epistles and complete the work that the Lord was doing through Paul. And so we, as members of the church, as Christians at UTEP, we have the ability to participate even of this fellowship for the furtherance of the gospel. We've been covering in this semester the matter of preaching the gospel, how to be prepared for it, not only for the beginning of preaching the gospel, but also how to take care of those once they've already received the Lord. And this is actually what Paul was doing. He didn't just preach the gospel and say, you know what, my work is done here, you guys have a good life. No, he took care of them. And it was the amount of care that, and the amount of love that Paul had for all these saints, all these churches, that he kept in touch with them. He wrote these epistles, regardless of the situation that he was in, which was he was in prison, right? So first point here is fellowship for the furtherance of the gospel, right? This participation. Second point that we will find, main point, is magnifying Christ by living him. And I just want to read Philippians 1:20, which talks about this matter. It goes like this: according to my earnest expectation and hope that in nothing I will be put to shame, but with all boldness, as always, even now, Christ will be magnified in my body, whether through life or through death. So this right here, it's talking about a testimony. The way that we can magnify Christ is by living him. And you might ask, well, what do you mean magnify Christ by living him? Well, they say we are what we eat, right? So by eating the word, by coming to the word and just reading his word, taking it in, praying the word, we 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 get this life in us, right? This life of Christ in us. And thus we start living a different kind of life. you know I'm sure that you as Christians have had some experience, some type of experience, that when someone comes to realize that you are a Christian, they say, you know what, I knew there was something different about you, because yeah, you don't do this and you don't do that. Well, that's the perfect example of magnifying Christ by living him. But the thing is, we may only magnify Christ to a certain extent, which is kind of small, because we may not eat much of him, much of his word. We won't participate much of this fellowship. But the more we get in it, the more we grow in life, and the more this life is expressed. And that is how we're able to magnify Christ, through our living, right? And as Paul said, even now Christ will be magnified in my body, whether through life or through death. And he was able to say that because he was willing to die for God. He was willing to die for the Lord, for the testimony that he was giving, being in prison. And last but not least, the last point that I want to talk about in this book of Philippians is striving along with the gospel with one soul, right? Striving. And we can see this in verse 27. It says, only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, that whether coming and seeing you or being absent, I may hear of the things concerning you, that you stand firm in one spirit, with one soul, striving together along with the faith of the gospel. Right? So the apostle, he was telling them, I need you to live a life, to conduct yourselves, in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. He was saying, I don't need to be there for you to, behave yourselves, worthy of the gospel. You guys need to do so regardless if I'm here or not. So, and he was telling him how. He was telling him how. He says that, stand firm in one spirit with one soul. And what is this matter of the one soul? Well, we need to realize that our soul, the strongest part of our soul is our mind. And our mind is actually what drives us to do things. If you get an idea, then your will acts on it, and then you do it, right? um but here, the apostle is telling them that they need to be of one mind, right? And the thing is, our spirit has been regenerated when we receive the Lord, but we need to be transformed in our soul. And that's the part that the Lord is working on right now, that the life that's in our spirit will overflow and start reaching our soul, especially our mind. And in that way, we will be able to be of one soul, of one mind, think alike. And once we have that same thinking, we're able to be in harmony with others in the church and the body of Christ. And in that way, we will be able to strive along with the gospel with one soul. So, I will stop here. I just wanted to, share to you these 3 points, which are, the main points in the book of Philippians. There is way much more that we can say, that I can say about this book, but you know, I wanna leave it up to you to dig in there and find all these other great verses in here, in the book of Philippians. So I would like for this small short video be useful to encourage you to read the book of Philippians. We will read the first chapter this week, and we hope that we can enjoy together and grow together so that we can be those that magnify Christ by living Him. Thank you all for joining me, and we will see you soon.